A dream. She questioned in her mind if it was a dream, wondering what exactly she was even owing at that moment. Who am I doing something like this with? How did I even? How could I, with Grand Duke Agars, be doing something like this? A chandelier scattering light everywhere, a gathering of nobles elegantly dressed in expensive gowns and suits. To Isabella, a banquet was nothing more than an event she had to endure in discomfort. No matter how splendid and grand the banquet was, to her it was nothing but noise. No one spoke to her, and no one noticed her presence. To Isabelle, who was no more than a ghostly guest, the banquet held no meaning at all. But the moment she met him was vivid. His name was Agars Heron Arthas, the brother of the crown prince who had ascended the throne as emperor. A man who lived a dissolute life without taking a grand duchess's comfort. Though unmarried and lacking restraint, something he rightly should have been criticized for, the state of his bed was what was most intriguing to women. With dazzling blonde hair and beautifully curved eyes, his glamorous appearance and sinful charm captured everyone's attention. And that was the same for Isabelle as well. From that point on, Isabelle's life completely changed. She began following Agars whenever he attended banquets, watching him. She even trained after him, disregarding the dignity expected of noble ladies. Banquets that once felt as nothing more than a discomfort became a previous time to Isabelle. She knew it was unbecoming of a lady, but she couldn't control herself. He was irresistibly captivating. And so Isabelle became Agar's stalker. Always remaining a wallflower, it was humiliating and exhausting, but now she was grateful that no one paid attention to her. Just watching him, the banquet hall was enough for her. On this day, she managed to overheat a conversation between two noble ladies about the Duke. They discussed how he'd gone hunting with the Emperor the previous day, and apparently when they examined the fox later, its eyes had been pierced with a single shot. They said there wasn't a single blemish on the fur. While the ladies took that as more proof on his exceptional skills, she stood behind them, her cheeks burning with heat. A devoted son and outstandingly capable, how can someone be so perfect? The ladies questioned. Until another lady suddenly asked if still, he wasn't too much for a man. The other ladies asked what she meant, and she explained that simply standing beside him felt so intimidating. A lady suddenly suggested maybe the Baroness was fond of him. She remarked that if someone saw her standing beside the Duke, there'd be quite the talk. She added that they did say he was no better than a beast in bed. The lady beside her giggled, immediately asking how she could say such, but the lady just asked if it wasn't something everyone else already knew. On the other hand, Isabelle, who'd been eavesdropping, confirmed it herself. She knew it was true, because she's seen it herself, just briefly. A lady suddenly mentioned that speaking like that amongst themselves wouldn't get them any answers. Rather, she retorted that only that young lady would know. Isabelle, realizing he was taking his leave, quickly set down her glass and got ready to follow him as usual. Following behind him, she wondered if he perhaps could be tired. Even his gait felt different from usual, and he wasn't heading somewhere quite with a lady like he usually did. She noticed as something dropped to the floor, and upon closer inspection she realized the Grand Duke had dropped his handkerchief. She bent down to pick it, thinking even if she were lucky, she'd only be able to pick up one strand of hair. She lifted her gaze, pleased with the thought of how only good things were happening that day. However, she didn't expect to meet the piercing gaze of other nobles. She immediately turned her head. Her heart pounded loudly against her chest, almost like it wanted to escape it, as she wondered if they'd seen everything. Instantly she started thinking of what to do if they scolded her for not returning the Grand Duke's handkerchief. However, the next time she looked up, they were all focused on other things. She wondered if perhaps she was imagining things, but she didn't have time to waste on that. She simply located the Grand Duke in the crowd again and hurried after him. She saw him get into a room and pondered on how he was acting strange that day. She wondered if he was going to be staying in his room alone that night, since there was no way he'd come that far without his partner. Curiosity got the best of her, and she started wondering if only she could get a quick look. Her gaze remained fixed on the door handle as she questioned silently if the door was locked. She slowly reached for the door, thinking if it was locked she'd Simony return to her room and be satisfied with falling asleep thinking of him. But if the door was then open? To her surprise, the door opened. She looked into the room, however, before she could complete her mission she realized someone was coming. She wondered what she should do, if she should hide and where she should hide, and her eyes suddenly shifted to the door handle. In the end, she walked into the Grand Duke's room. Staring at him lying on the bed already asleep, she could only repeat over and over in her head that she's lost her mind. But seriously, gang, what was she thinking coming in there? After a while, she noticed the footsteps was gone, and since the Grand Duke didn't seem to have heard her come in, she thought if she were to leave at that moment no one would ever notice that she snuck in. However, her gaze reluctantly shifted to the Grand Duke's side. She was pulled into that moment and quickly got distracted. She slipped off her heels thinking to indulge her desires for just a moment. Just for a very brief moment. If she could just see his face up close, if it's just that, wouldn't it be okay? Finally, she stood over him, staring down at him while he slept peacefully. A smile appeared on her lips as she thought of how it was really the Grand Duke. She stepped closer, watching with adoration as she thought of how it was her first time ever seeing him up close. He was just like a statue, moonlight golden hair, pure white skin, even his pale-colored lips, everything was beautiful. His face was far more delicate than the ones in her dreams that she couldn't help but think of when she'd ever get the chance to look at the Grand Duke that closely. She leaned over the thought of just a moment ago she's regretted coming into that room, but now, she was actually happy she did. Then, caught up in the moment, she pressed her lips to his. His eyes blinked open, and the next thing she heard was his sharp voice demanding to know who was there. She stepped back, covering her mouth in shock while he just looked at her. She shook with fear, wondering what to do, while he simply just asked who she was. Then he took her hand, asking if she was the goddess of the night. She pleaded with him to let go, but he just reminded her she was the one who'd snuck into a man's room. She tried to think of possible other excuses she could make, but it was too late as the Grand Duke soon pulled her into his arms. Then he muttered some unclear words about that working out perfectly. He told her she'd have to help him. She stared at him, wondering if perhaps he was drunk, but her mind quickly drifted to the banquet. He hadn't taken any strong alcohol yet, he was acting like someone intoxicated. Without a single word, he reached for the button of her dress. She let out a soft cry for him to stop, but he just assured her it was okay, saying it wasn't something scary. He continued undoing her buttons. She called him shyly, and he simply ordered, "You do it yourself. The dress, take it off with your own hands." He told her he didn't have strength in his hands at the moment, while she blinked in confusion, her mind lingering on his words. She thought of running away, but then, she gave in. A smile appeared on his lips as he praised her, saying it was just like that. Then he suddenly pulled her dress. He looked at her and commented that her reaction was shy, then, he continued. But the next moment she paused, before suddenly calling the Grand Duke. His lips rubbed her cheek as he gave a simple order, "Spread your legs." "Please?" He had a smirk on his face while she just wondered what he meant by that. All she could deduce was that he didn't mean it in a good way. Just as she thought of quitting, he suddenly spoke again. This time he assured her it was fine, and then followed with a plea, "It's fine, so, please." She went still, and the next thing that left his mouth was a simple, "You did well." Then he dropped another request, "Now, come up on top of me." She agreed without hesitation, swept up by his charm and charisma. He gently kissed her cheek, calling her good, which was shocking to her. To confirm what she'd heard, she asks if she's good, and he says yes. Her thought immediately shifted to how she'd never been called good all her life, and at that, coming from the Grand Duke, it was such an honor. Finally, he took off his shirt, remarking that she was pretty, so maybe he should cherish her more. She rolled her eyes around, wondering how things had ended up like that. That wasn't what she'd come there for. It felt like she was going to lose her mind. The next morning, she woke up in the Duke's arms. She'd forgotten all the details of the past night until she turned her head and found the Grand Duke lying in bed next to her. She pressed a hand over her mouth immediately, a single question lingering coming to mind: why? Why is Lord Agar's right in front of my eyes? And why are we in the same bed? What happened last night? Once the images came back to her, she explained in shock. She wondered how she could get out of that situation. First, she needed to slip away quietly without waking him up. However, she couldn't resist taking another look at the Grand Duke before leaving. With the Grand Duke right beside her, that was even more confirmation that last night wasn't a dream at all. She thought of how she'd spent so much time chasing after him, but she never imagined they'd end up like that. Staring closer, she supposes she shouldn't even hope for that in her dreams anymore. She got dressed and ready to take her leave, but before she left she gave him one last glance, telling him goodbye in her heart, hoping the next time they meet it's from a distance. She returned to her home that morning. It was still so early, so she figured no one should be awake. If she could just sneak into her room. However, a voice suddenly called out from behind, asking if she was just getting home. The woman behind her pointed out that she couldn't possibly have gone for a walk in that attire, and the state of her dress was completely wrinkled. That lady was the Baroness of House Wrens, Kyria. She greeted her, but the lady was intent on scolding her. She asked her to look at herself and asked if she had no shame, saying she a grown woman staying out all night and dragging herself in at dawn. She asked if she was up to something unspeakable, and she immediately denied it. The Baroness completely bought it, remarking that she doubted someone as timid as her would have the mind for such filth, asking her to remember her place and behave accordingly. Lastly, she ordered that she ensure she isn't humiliated by the actions of an illegitimate child. She apologized, however the Baroness just asked her to save her out apologies. She declared that she was an eyesore and asked her to get out of her sight and go to her room, and she obediently agreed. On the other hand, a person was attempting to wake up the Grand Duke. He asked if he had any idea how long he'd been looking for him, demanding he etuk that instant. When he opened his eyes, he dismissed him cruelly. He asked his secretary to stop shaking him cause his head was hurting. It felt like he was dying, while his secretary only questioned how much activity he'd gotten up to the previous night to feel like death. Or perhaps your stamina is finally failing you, Your Highness? He suggested. The Grand Duke got up in annoyance, demanding he repeat himself, but his secretary only celebrated him finally waking up. The Grand Duke finally, after calming down, asks his assistant if someone was there when he got in, and he responded with a simple no. His secretary called his attention to the oddness of the situation. He pointed out how usually his partner was still in bed while he was the first one up and out, yet that day he wouldn't even stir until he woke him. The Grand Duke only considered how the drug must have been stronger than he'd thought. Although his memory was still a bit hazy because of the drug, but he could remember the woman he held the previous night was incredibly sweet. He thinks he should have at least seen her face. He turned his head and around a strand of blue-violet hair on the bed and was immediately mesmerized by its beauty. The Grand Duke got dressed and received endless praises from his secretary. He informed him they'd be going to the Imperial Palace, and when asked what business he had there, he only smiled before revealing he was going to see his older brother. He arrived at the Imperial Palace and without even a proper announcement burst into his brother's office. He asked if he hadn't missed him all that time, however his brother just remained silent. When he finally spoke, he asked what place they were in, and the Tranduk replied nervously, saying it was the Emperor's office. Then he made a shocking demand, asking that he address him as Your Majesty. Rather than getting offended, he just smiled. Then he went down on one knee and gave a proper introduction, paying his respects, but his brother just stared back in horror. Then he asks him to just call him brother. He asks if he's busy, and he responds saying he was, and if he helped him he thinks he'd become quite free. However, the Grand Duke just threw himself on the couch, asking what he was talking about. He asked how an incompetent man such as himself could help him. His brother asks why he's there, and he responds asking what he means by that. He asks if it doesn't occur to him that he's there simply because he missed him, and his brother replies with a straight no. His brother suddenly mentions that he's heard he hadn't even returned to the Grand Duchy the previous day and asks if it isn't about time he settles down, asking if he was going to keep living like that. Gently setting down his teacup, Simony remarks that how he was suddenly bringing up marriage, and asks if he was his parents or something, and his brother simply answers firmly saying he was his brother, so he could say it. He continued noting, besides, he was already late for marriage. As he said, since ancient times, members of the Imperial family were famous for being scarce in number. So, getting engaged early and getting married became an established custom. Illis too, his older brother too, was ranged early and rose all the way to the throne as the current emperor. In contrast, Agris, despite being over 20, had neither married nor even gotten engaged, so Illis's worries could only grow. He asked his brother why it was that he and his mother were so desperate to get him married, but his brother just responded asking if it wasn't natural. He continued as he rose up slowly, a man of age who doesn't marry and just wanders around having fun. He shared that he believed he was still at an age where he could have fun, however his brother simply replied that that age had passed. He stated that the Imperial family was already as short-handed as it was and suggested he should hurry up and get married. He asked his brother if rather than him he shouldn't be the one to have a child, noting the lineage will get all tangled up, and his brother just asks if that was the reason for his refusal to get married. Playing into that, he suggested maybe when the crown prince is born, but he didn't expect his brother's next statement. He suddenly asked how long he planned to keep flirting from one banquet to another like a mayfly. He urged him to hurry up and get married if he didn't like getting called a mayfly, asking just how long he planned to live like that. He simply asks what he can do if he doesn't feel like getting married at the moment. He tried to offer his brother a cigar, however he simply warned him to refrain from smoking cigars in front of him from then on. He turned his head to the side as he completed his statement, saying, Serendia disliked it. His brother teased him, joking that he'd become just as doting as their father, however he agreed to stop smoking if the Empress disliked it. Illis suddenly brings back the topic about marriage, asking him to explain what he meant about not wanting to get married. He let out a sigh before explaining that there was no deep meaning, it just meant there was no woman he loved enough to get married to. If possible, he wanted to marry someone he truly loved. His brother chuckled, remarking softly that hearing him talk about love was laughable, but he just asks if he thought he was incapable of love. His brother denied it and moved to explain better. It was more like he didn't seem to know what love was. Clueless, he asked if he didn't love both he and their mother, however Illis simply explained that that was familial affection, noting he had to think of someone who wasn't blood related. Pointing at him, he reveals that if he brings him anyone he loves, he'll welcome anyone, urging him to think carefully. Even if she was an orphan or a beggar from the streets, it didn't matter, all that mattered was him bringing a woman. To entice him, he reveals he'll hold a wedding more splendid than his coronation and marriage, but he just refuses. He tells his brother he hadn't come there to talk about things like that. His brother asks what he'd come there for then, and he explains in this way. Well, you see, brother, the thing is I got caught. His brother's eyes widened almost immediately, a single what? Escaping his lips. Then the Grand Duke repeats himself again, this time more clearer. So what I'm saying is, someone took a bite of me and ran off. His brother asks what he's talking about, and he explains that someone had spiked his drink, and as a result, after a few glasses, he started to feel hazy and lost it. His brother immediately asks if he was poisoned, but he just assures him it's fine, reminding him he has a resistance to poison. However, he continued, explaining that it seemed like some kind of aphrodisiac, and even called it a cheap one at that, because when he woke up, his body ached and his head was spinning, even getting dressed was a struggle. The Emperor, remaining composed, asks what happened after that, and he reveals once he realized he'd been drugged, he went straight back to his room and someone followed him inside. Illis let out a sigh, his thoughts spiraled as he tried to process everything. Breaking into his room too, it could be an assassin targeting the Imperial family. It was more serious than he'd thought, however the Grand Duke's next words left him stunned. He reveals that she kissed first after that. His brother demands to know what he's doing, but he remains calm, insisting she kissed him first. After that it was all a blur, and when he woke up in the morning, she'd slept with him and ran off. His brother slipped his tea in relief, remarking that he was glad he wasn't the one who attacked them. However, the Grand Duke demands to know if that's all he has to say, reminding him his younger brother was assaulted overnight. The Emperor asks if he was upset then, and he responds saying not really. If he was being honest at all, it felt good. Even in that haze he was completely absorbed. He wondered if she was a small woman. He thought she was an assassin with an unusual build, but instead of killing him she just kissed him. The more he thought about it, the more amusing it seemed. His brother then asks what his problem is, since he'd said he enjoyed it, and he just smiled, accepting that there wasn't one. He retorts that he might have bothered him for nothing after all that morning, and the Emperor, taking advantage of that, asks him to go help with work if he has that much understanding, since he already wasted enough time on his personal life that he didn't even want to know about. However, the Grand Duke got up. He announced to the Emperor that his younger brother was still unwell from the aphrodisiac, so he'll head back and rest, asking him to take care. Outside, as he walks with his secretary, he suddenly mentions something odd. He asks what Banquets have sent him invitations, and when he gets a response he orders him to tell them he'll attend every single one. Scene was quite shocked, but the Grand Duke just repeated himself, noting he'll attend every single one. He asks him to make sure the schedules doesn't overlap. However, his secretary still stood shocked, asking why all of a sudden. He did attend Banquets often, but it wasn't like that. The Grand Duke's response was vague. There's something I need to find. His assistant asks what it is, and he responded with a light chuckle, who knows? Maybe Cinderella? On the other hand, Isabelle woke up around noon feeling hungry. She thought to get something to eat and walked downstairs, only to bump into an attendant. He asked if anything was the matter, pointing out that that place led to the kitchen, and she admits she was feeling a bit hungry. He responds with a simple "I see" before asking her to return to her room as he'll send a maid to her. He turned to leave, however she stopped him. She hesitated at first, however she finally spoke and asked if he could prepare some bath water for her, which her agreed to. She returned to her room, her expression gloomy as she pondered on how from a young age, she could sense people's emotion. Though she was a baron's child, she was nothing more than an illegitimate child. Perhaps because she grew up keenly aware of the uncomfortable gazes directed at her, she learned how to read the feelings people hide. Just now, like when she senses the butler's annoyance and irritation. It can't be helped. She was an illegitimate child, and he was the one who managed the estate. Of course he wouldn't want to treat her like other nobles. Her gaze lowered as she concluded, perhaps troubled was the more accurate word. Just then, a maid's voice interrupted her, informing her that her bath water was ready. They all came in after receiving her permission and set everything up for her before taking their leave again. As she got into the bath, she pondered on how there was a bath reserved for noble ladies, but she wasn't allowed to use it. Every time she washed there, she was reminded of just how out of place she was. However, that day, she was glad she was an illegitimate child. Suddenly her lips curled into a gentle smile as she thought of the Grand Duke. Lord Agars, whenever I think of your highness, this loneliness fades away. I love you, Lord Agars. Later that night, she stood in her room, observing the bright moonlight. She couldn't help but think of how if her room were a bit higher she'd see it more clearly. The moon shining so brilliantly amongst the starlight, it felt as though she was looking at Lord Agars. She wanted to look at the moon a bit longer, however the trees were blocking it so she couldn't see it properly. So she had a bold thought, maybe she should just go outside and look. However, that innocent thought only led to trouble as she ran into Lyris Renz, the legitimate daughter of the Baron, who called her annoying and questioned why she was out of her room. She explained that she was only going for a short walk, however, she only picked on her, asking why she was walking around with her face held up like that. She reminded her that she'd asked her to keep her head down whenever she walked, and Isabelle apologized. She turned to leave, mumbling about how seeing her face the moment she stepped out had to mean she had a terrible luck, but it was even more annoying when Isabelle asked where she was going. Alan Renz, the eldest son of the Baron, responded calming, saying he was on his way to the Count's banquet as well, received an invitation. However, Lyris snapped. She demanded to know why he would even answer her like that. Her brother tried to calm her down, asking her not to be like that, as she always appeared like she was dying to tear into Isabelle the minute she spots her, but Lyri's only just asked if it didn't annoy him. She noted that a bastard was openly walking around their house and with her head held high no less. As the real child of the Baron, she insisted she at least had the right to be angry. Isabelle's fingers twitched. She couldn't agree any more. Unlike her, a bastard child, Lyri's was born between the Baron and Baroness. She was the true young lady of that household. Unlike she, who struggled to receive even a single piece of jewelry despite the family's wealth, she envied how generously everything was given to Lyri's. But that feeling only lasted for a fleeting moment, as once she realized she was a bastard, that kind of treatment began to feel only natural. Lyri's continued sulking, remarking that just looking at her made her luck turn sour and she just wished she'd disappear. However, Alan just calmly asked her not to call her that. He told her even so Isabelle was her older sister, and she yelled in frustration, demanding to know who he said was her older sister. In an attempt to quell her anger, he explained that he didn't mean she was her sister, he just means she is older than her. She called him annoying while he just tried to coax her, asking that they take their leave, but Isabelle interrupted again. This time she asked if by any chance the Grand Duke would be attending the banquet. He responded saying he wasn't sure, as he hadn't heard anything like that, but it wasn't all banquets the Tranduc usually attended, and she thanked him for responding. They took their leave and she remained behind. Her mind called for the Grand Duke, asking what exactly he was doing at the moment. The moonlight is especially beautiful tonight. Are you looking at the moon just like me? She spent 3 days pacing back and forth, wondering whether or not to attend a banquet just for the Grand Duke. Until finally, she attended. She couldn't resist. She tried not to see the Grand Duke, however she grew restless. Besides, she kept thinking about what happened that night and couldn't calm down. She was sure once would be enough, but now, she hoped it'll happen just one more time. She wanted to feel him again, even only just a little. She raised her head and was lucky to spot the Grand Duke in the crowd. She wondered if it was because she hadn't seen him in days he looked even more beautiful. Just as expected, the noble ladies around began speaking. They mentioned it was strange, the Grand Duke didn't bring a partner that day and he came alone the last time too. A lady asks how long it's been, and the other one responds saying it's the 4th time, asking if it is that he has been unable to find a partner. Isabelle drifted into thought herself. The Grand Duke always used to enter with a partner. If he hasn't been attending with one, does that mean he was coming alone every time? And most importantly, did it mean he was trying to find a partner at the banquet? The next minute she raises her head, she realizes the Grand Duke has chosen a partner. The ladies pointed out how her hair color turned out to be black, and for some reason lately his partner's hair has always been black. They questioned if he had fallen for that particular hair color those days or... Isabelle, who stood to the side, only thought of how her hair was dark and it looked like she had black hair, so maybe it'll work. For some reason, her chest felt tight. She'd never felt like that before, so what could be the reason? The noble lady's voice snapped her out of her thought, and she raised her head just in time to find the Grand Duke walking away. So, without thinking, she rushed to follow him quickly. She hid behind a curtain, watching the Grand Duke with the other lady. He was enjoying a secret rendezvous there that night that she couldn't help but think of how she used to imagine all night what the Grand Duke's lips must feel like. Now she knew what his kids was like. It felt like being devoured. The sighs between him and the lady grew louder, however he suddenly stopped. Then he simply remarked that she wasn't the one. He apologized and asked her to go back while she asked if it was a joke. She asked where she was supposed to go to, and he replied saying anywhere, maybe her house, the banquet hall, because he had no desire to go on with that. She got irritated and demanded to know what he was doing, stopping all of a sudden without any manners, but he just apologized if he'd gotten her hopes up. But what should I do if I feel no desire for you? Still, since he was fickle, he figured he'd apologize. She ended up leaving in annoyance while Isabelle continued hiding behind the curtain. She couldn't help but think of how the Grand Duke had never stopped halfway before. He let out a frustrated sigh. complaining that all of it was killing him. It was harder to catch than he thought. She wondered what he meant, but then his voice suddenly came, sharp and unmistakable. "All right. You there, come out now." Her whole body went weak in a matter of minutes. She wondered if he was talking about her. She heard his voice again, demanding she comes out, and she trembled immediately, finally realizing she was caught. However, the soft voice of a lady suddenly called out, "Your Highness." He swept a portion of her hair into his hand and, seeing he was interested, asked if he liked black hair. However, to her surprise, he replied saying no, it was his preference. He asked if it was dyed, and she responded saying yes, asking again if he liked it, but he just turned her around and asked her to return for her safety as well. As she watched the lady take her leave, she wondered if the Grand Duke was just letting someone go again. It was the first time she'd seen him like that. He rubbed his neck, remarking that he was tired and should finish that. Then he ordered again. "You come out too, I know you're there." She was in doubt at first, unable to believe there was someone else there, but he just asked her to step out while he was still being polite. He specified that he was talking about her, the one behind the curtain, and then finally came out. Her eyes shifted nervously to the side as she approached him. He asked her to step a bit closer, and she obeyed despite the fear in her heart. He asked if she'd come there because she heard he was interested in black hair too. She was so nervously she couldn't even speak that she ended up shaking her head in response. He asks who she is then, noting she'd been watching him all day. "Right, Lady Wallflower?" She tried to make an excuse, but he just dismissed it, saying it didn't matter. He asks if she dyed her hair black, but after taking a closer look, he exclaimed, finally, looking closer, "It's a blue-violet color." She appeared confused, but he didn't waste any time and pulled her into his arms for a kiss. She struggled for breath, but that didn't matter. He continued, and when he finally pulled away, a smile appeared on his lips as he remarked that it was her. She asks what he means, and he again repeats himself, but this time in form of a question. "It's you, isn't it? The runaway Cinderella." Her mouth widened in shock. She turned her head to the side, asking what the Grand Duke was on, but he just insisted she was the one. "You ate me and bolted." He asks if she was also the one who drugged him at the banquet 3 days ago, and she immediately denies it. The Grand Duke, with a satisfied smile, then asks if she's saying she wasn't the one who'd given him the drug. Then does that mean the rest is true? "So, it really was you who slept with me?" Realizing she can no longer escape, she apologized. To her surprise, he takes her hand and assured her he isn't offended. He admits actually he's been looking for her. She asks if he was looking for her to report her, and he responds saying no. She asks why, and he admits he was curious about her face. "I finally caught you, my Cinderella." Then, without another word, he leaned forward to kiss her. He bit her ear, then he rubbed his head against her chest, revealing he was looking for the woman who spent the night with him that night. That clumsy kiss just now, it was unmistakable. "Even if I don't remember anything else, I clearly remember your kiss and how you felt." He pulled her into his arms, his lips brushing against her cheek while she called out to him. He asks if she doesn't like it, and she stays silent before finally saying no. He suggests they go into the room together. Inside, he took off his gloves and took her hand, asking her to come closer. Then once she settled on top of him, he slowly kissed her. Few minutes in and her dress was loose. He admitted that he wanted to take it slow, but he was a bit impatient. "It's delicious," he suddenly remarked. She appeared shocked, but he just told her it's true, saying he feels like burying his face down there. "But they could just do that later. I just want to do it quickly now. You cry so prettily. I really like that." He asks for her name, and she hesitates at first before finally revealing it's Isabelle. He leaned forward and kissed her ear, saying he sees. Before revealing he's glad he met her. Their clothes were scattered around while she clings to him, groaning in pleasure. She finally pushed him, insisting she was tired and couldn't continue, but he just told her he still wanted more. Seeing her expression, he agreed to allow her catch her breath for a minute on the condition that she just doesn't provoke him. He swept up a little amount of her hair into hand, staring at it with intent focus that it made her wonder if he was really staring at her hair. Getting her courage, she asks if he likes black hair, and he responds saying he doesn't particularly have any preference, hair color doesn't matter to him. He continues staring, but if she was wondering why he was staring at her hair that much, it's because her hair is beautiful. It was the first time she'd heard that she couldn't help but ask if he really thought it was beautiful, and he responded asking if that sounded like a lie. With a hair color that pretty, he wondered aloud who could possibly dislike it. Then he asks if he can ask her a question. He asks why she keeps staring at him. It felt like you were watching me all day long. She wondered what to say as she pondered on how the only reason she kept looking at him was because she liked him. If she told him that, she wondered if he might feel burdened after all. The reason the Grand Duke kept sleeping with her was because he liked that night, not because he liked her. She struggled, but she finally got the words out, "You're beautiful, Your Highness." He was stunned at first, but slowly a smile appeared on his lips. He placed a gentle kiss on her cheek as he replied that she was truly beautiful too. He asked if she was feeling better now, since morning was still a bit far off. He'd like to pick off where he left. The next morning, she lays in bed with the Grand Duke. He was awake watching her. As he gently tucked her hair behind her ear, he remarked, "So this is what she looks like." She wasn't as pretty as he expected, my thought guys, what? In the actual, what does he mean? Although she wasn't as pretty as he expected, but she was great in bed. That aside, she was strangely naive. Even knowing she was inexperienced with men the previous night was quite the shock. "Your Highness, you won't die now, right?" "I want to stop. Last time you said that if we didn't do this, you felt like dying. You said you might really die. But now surely we've done enough, so isn't it okay to stop?" He wondered what on earth she was rambling about, but after he thought about it he realized he must have said something like that. But he had no desire to clear the air, rather he played into it, saying just to be safe, she should help him a bit longer. In the present day, a soft laugh escapes his lips. He spoke aloud of how he had a hard time holding back his laughter, to think she actually believes he'll die if they don't do it. Her naivety is severe, no, perhaps her charm. He didn't particularly like naive women, they often attached meaning to small actions and became clingy, but somehow her clumsiness doesn't bother him. So in that case there was no reason to refuse. He gently woke her up from her sleep, and as she rubbed her eyes he found himself captivated by her even more. He asked if he was pretty, but quickly turned around and changed the topic. "Since you're up, we should start getting ready. It's time for you to go home." That's all for now guys, and as always, I'll see you guys in my next video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.